Count. 1, 2, 3, 1. Oh, yeah, that's their mahi, boy. That's their mahi.
Kia ora whanau and welcome to Around the Grounds, a podcast from New Zealand Rugby bringing you closer to our national game. There is so much discussion and information around player safety in rugby today, but what can be challenging is understanding all the various terms and acronyms, as well as how that information applies to your level of rugby, your role in the game, whether it be a player, a coach, an administrator, a parent, or just someone who loves the game and wants to better understand. So on Around the Grounds, we're doing a 4-part series with some guests who hopefully can inform our rugby community on all things player safety. And on this pod, we've got a couple of big brains to answer frequently asked questions on player safety in the women's game. Welcome to the podcast, Karen Rasmussen and Janelle Romanchuk. How are you going, team?
Pretty good, thank you.
All right, firstly, I know you guys are obviously in here because you're probably the best podcasters in New Zealand Rugby office, like no doubt at all. So I appreciate you guys coming in. Firstly, look, tell us a little bit about what your role is, what you do, where you have joined us from today.
Yes, so I'm Karen Rasmussen. I'm the medical manager for New Zealand Rugby. My background's as a physiotherapist, but I'm responsible for managing the medical requirements across the game from the community level right through to the elite end of the game. So it's a pretty big role. So anything that you can think of that falls into the medical space is in my remit.
That's you. That's pretty. That's a pretty big portfolio I'm picking, even more so these days. Janelle?
Yeah, so my name's Janelle Romanchuk, and I'm currently the concussion research scientist for New Zealand Rugby, and I'm a lot more focused on the community side, so and community and concussions. So that would include putting in support systems and management systems so that number one, players, coaches, parents are educated around concussion, but also supporting them on the pathways so that if or when they do have a concussion, they know who to contact and how they can get back to play. And then also looking at other ways that we can look to reduce concussion. So that's kind of the space that I work in. My background's actually biomechanics, and I'm currently based down in Dunedin and work remotely. So.
Now, it doesn't sound your traditional Dunedin accent. Like, when did you make it over here to New Zealand, and what was your background before that?
Yeah, you bet. You caught me. So I'm Canadian.
Slowly changing. I see some evolution. It's getting there, but
yeah, it's slowly changing. But yeah, I've been in New Zealand for about 6 years, and my journey here has been pretty varied. To be honest, I actually come from a mechanical engineering background.
Wow.
Did my undergrad in Canada. I've been a rugby player probably since I was about 14. Got introduced to it in high school, like a lot of female rugby players. My main sport was actually similar to ice hockey. It's called ring ed, and rugby was a summer sport, so it worked really well for me. And then I actually I was really interested in my passion of sports and engineering. Took me over to the UK to pursue a degree in sports engineering. So I actually had the chance to play in the Premiership over in the UK as well.
Wow.
And then my partner and I moved over here about 6 years ago. Just came on a holiday working visa and fell in love with the country. So yeah.
There it is. That's awesome. Like, as I said, a couple of big brains, and also great that you've also got that playing background, which I'm sure is really useful when you're doing your work as well around concussion and rugby. Look, you both work broadly across New Zealand Rugby. What are some of because we're talking about player safety for our women players today. What's some of the big factors and big differences with the women's game compared to men, and probably talk a little bit around, firstly, at the community level, and then what that looks like also as well at the elite level.
Yeah, I'll jump in and just talk about the community level. So what we know from our participation data is that our females are entering the game at very different ages and stages compared to the typical male. So we've got females that are entering the game at that early stage in small blacks. Then we've got another wave of participants that are joining the game in high school, so kind of when they're 14, 15. And then we've also got a lot of females joining the game later in life at the senior club level. So what that means in terms of our models is that they've got to be quite flexible. That we understand the challenges that coaches have when you might have a first year player, their first game, potentially playing against a Black Fern within the same game, and how do you create challenge within your trainings, but also within your game. So there is a lot of different challenges that our coaches face to help support their athletes. And sometimes athletes, they may have joined the game they might be becoming a black fern within 2 or 3 years. So often they go through a really accelerated pathway development.
That's an exciting challenge to take on, isn't it? And I know from my own experiences, like there's more and more all girls teams turning up in our boys grade. I know for the first time ever in the history of my local rugby club, we have a premier women's team, and I'm sure I have no doubt at all that, to your point, there is people entering their rugby journey at all different stages there. They might have been motivated by the Women's World Cup that we saw a couple of years ago, and they went along to a few games and thought, I want to get involved in that. But also it's hugely dynamic as well, so I've got to provide the right information for everyone, no matter where they're getting in. What about at the elite level? What does it look like there?
It's grown a lot in the last few years, and particularly probably the last 4 years. There's been a lot more resource go into the Black Ferns program where it wasn't there in the past, which is really good. Obviously, the Rugby World Cup a couple of years ago, that was hugely inspiring for a lot of our young girls, as you said, and so that is something that we're noticing, is that more and more young women are wanting to play rugby, and so you're getting that growth at the club level. And so what we need to do is make sure that we're managing the risk, that Janelle's talked about players who are coming into the game with differing levels of experience, who haven't been like our boys who have come through from 5 years old and played right through to that elite level. They're coming in later, so we have to tailor what we're doing to each of those different levels.
Let's talk a little bit about that, because from my experiences, the girls that have played in the boys' grades that I've coached through the years rip in hard, really aggressive, which is awesome. But I assume that particularly tackle technique, that's such a big part of our game, that we need to do a bit of work there to make sure that when they enter the game, they're getting the right information on how to tackle properly. Do we have specific sort of training programs for our wahine getting into rugby?
Yeah, that's actually a project that our community team is working on this year. So really in the early stages of that, looking at some co-design projects along the players, the unions, and experts in the field to understand how we can support these players, kind of bringing them on that accelerated journey, kind of like an on-ramp program, so that they do have the tools and skills to succeed, and that they are having positive experiences to stay in the game.
Yeah, cool. That's awesome to hear, because what does the research tell us around tackle safety? Is it different for female players versus male players? Are parts of our body stronger, weaker, etc.? When we're putting those programs in place, what's some of the research telling you around what needs to be the focus?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so some really interesting data that's come out of New Zealand, but also out of the UK, is our females are often seen, they're more susceptible to whiplash.
Okay.
So we are seeing more head to ground type mechanisms, either through, a higher rate of head acceleration events, but also concussions that are happening for females. So there is some anatomical differences and obviously anatomy differences between males and females that we're aware of. We're definitely looking to include that. So yeah. I guess to unpick that a little bit, the female neck is a bit more flexible, and that's just due to how the vertebrae of your neck actually stack together. So males might have a bit of a wider and deeper vertebrae, which adds to that kind of column stability of their neck, and females, they're just a bit shallower and a bit narrower. So things like activating your neck is really important. There's research that shows that males, no surprise, have overall greater neck strength than female rugby players. But it's knowing these, but how can we kind of, put those tools in to really amplify our females? So that's probably a key one that we're focusing on, is around that neck activation, but also training athletes how to land safely to the ground. Yeah. If we've got females entering the game at 14, 15, yes. Just some basic skills of how to, confidently fall to ground and how to protect your head and tuck your chin, that, when they were U5, U6, U7, that they were happy to roll around. But, some of those skills that are really important to introduce for females that are entering the game later in life.
We also know that females, so you talked about females having a higher rate of concussions than men, but also having more severe concussions and symptoms that are more prolonged than their male counterparts. So We're not entirely sure why that is. It could be the effect of estrogen, but that's why a lot of the research that we're doing in the women's game, or that we're wanting to do in the women's game, is so important, so that we can understand why, and then we can target interventions towards that.
But I think if nothing else, it sounds like, look, integrate into a warm-up. If you've got a girls team or a female team, make sure that activating your neck is a big part of your warm-up. Like you say, getting people to confidently learn how to fall on the ground early days. And it sounds like too, if you are a coach or a manager or a physio for a female team, being aware that female players are a bit more susceptible to concussion, and perhaps being even a little bit more conservative with those players is as good a place to start, isn't it, while we're kind of finding this stuff out for sure. Karen, like you work across all pro rugby, medical teams in both the male and female game. Is it different if I look at like a Super Rugby Opeki team or the Black Ferns? Is it a different setup? Is there different considerations? Like what does that look like from a female team perspective?
So we've been pretty deliberate about when we set up Super Rugby Opeki that we wanted it to look like a Super Rugby Pacific team. So they have a team doctor, a team physio. We have the HIA process in Super Rugby Opeki. We have the same number of match day doctors. So the requirements that we have around both competitions is the same. Where you do see the differences are probably at that next level down. At NPC and FPC level, where the resourcing isn't quite as good because we don't have as much money across the whole game, and so in the women's competition we don't have a team doctor. Most teams don't have a team doctor, so we've been looking at different ways that we can use other health professionals at that level, so that you're getting more medical support. So last year we trialled the HIA process in the FPC, and we used physios. Usually you have to have doctors, so and it's a model that, it's not unique to New Zealand, that issue. And so it's something that World Rugby have been looking at rolling out across the world. So that trial was the first time that we used non-medical people to help with that process.
And while I know, obviously we'd love to have, all those games, appropriately resourced, and hopefully over time the funding will be there. But also it shows there's quite a lot of opportunity in the game, isn't there? Like there's not just the playing aspect of it, but there's all these different requirements to make a team hum, whether it be at the community level or the professional level. So it's quite cool for people who may be wanting to get more involved in women's rugby. There's actually plenty of avenues to do that, isn't there?
That's right. So there's just, you just have to be innovative, when there's not the same sort of resourcing. And that can be used in the men's game as well, because at NPC level we have issues getting medical people involved. So, the more creative you can be, the better.
Totally. Look, I've certainly been on this journey. Like ACLs is a growing concern in all sports. Like perhaps as we get bigger, faster, stronger, perhaps. But firstly, as someone who's been through this process, so this advice is a bit too late for me. But do you have some tips and tricks on firstly how do we get ahead of it? How do we prevent it? Like what can you do if you're involved in contact sports and in rugby to try and mitigate the chances of having an ACL? Because we do quite often see our favourite players suffer the injury and have to be out of the game for 6, 8, 7, 9 months. So what can we do to get ahead of it? Yeah,
absolutely. I think, like a lot of potential injuries, we look at factors that we can potentially mitigate. So for knee injuries, for ACL, MCL, a lot of it is around the strength around the knee. So that'd be your quads, your hamstrings, your calves, making sure that you have good overall strength. But also how quickly those muscles are able to react. Yeah. So including things like bounds, jumping, so that you're able to look at that, what's called the neuromuscular pathway of how quickly muscles are activating. So things like single leg hops, double leg hops, doing lateral bounds to really focus on that lateral stability is really important. So you could include those in a warm up, or if you're an athlete and you're training, you could have 1 or 2 sessions dedicated a week just to those plyometric type exercises, which are really helpful. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Oh, so just, as you say, just preparing with, making sure that you've got good strength around your knee, good core strength, looking at the hip as well. And I guess it's just like you say with any injury, if you can kind of make sure that you're doing all of your basics right, then that helps to prevent injury down the line as well.
Yeah, and we know that there is a higher risk for female athletes.
Okay.
And part of the reason for that is males versus females, their anatomy is different. As females go through puberty, their hips widen. Okay. So one of the things that heightens that risk is what's called the Q angle. So that's the angle basically from your hip to your knee. And if you think of a female with their hips being a bit wider, that angle is a bit more, bit larger than what it is on males. So that does put them at, a slightly higher risk due to that angle. And particularly as females are going through puberty, and their hips are getting wider, but their muscles haven't, their bone development is going first, and then their muscles are catching up. That sometimes the strength isn't quite there for where, their hips have widened. They don't quite have the strength behind that. So it is really important, particularly through those puberty years, to be, focusing on overall strength and introducing some of those plyometric exercises. So
I like it. I just tried to not tackle, but that didn't work. So, look, menstrual health is a key part of not just women's rugby, but women's sport in general. Like, how important is the topic, and how are you integrating it into advice or guidelines and the different information that you're getting out to a female rugby community?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Menstrual health is really important for all female athletes, and the first important step is to ensure that you are having a regular menstrual cycle, and that does vary from female to female. It could be as short as 21 days, or it could be up to 35 days. And I guess my number one recommendation for players or coaches in this area would be to start tracking. So that would be to start tracking your cycle, so you know what a regular cycle looks like for you. There's lots of good apps and resources out there. You can search online. There's probably 5 to 10 different menstrual cycle tracking apps, and it just becomes part of your routine, and it kind of lays out your calendar, and you can put in your symptoms that you might be having, and then as you start to track, you start to find common threads about when you might be having certain symptoms, or if you might notice it gives you a warning that your period should be coming up, and if you happen to miss it, that could be a flag that something else is going on. So the first step is to that I'd recommend to any athlete is to start tracking it.
Because we're talking a little bit earlier, like sometimes getting involved in rugby is a massive change, isn't it? You go from doing, a completely different lifestyle. You're training a lot, you're getting involved, you're playing games, and so that affects those sort of things, doesn't it? So you need to make sure that you're putting all that information together, and then you can give yourself the best opportunity to go out there and rip into it in the game. Mm-hmm. That's great advice. We want to talk a little bit about concussion. It is complex, there's a lot of information around it, and I know there's just forever more and more research going on to understand it. And you talked a little bit about it earlier, but what's the kind of really notable differences you found in the research when it comes to concussion between female players and male players?
I suppose firstly there's not as much research in the women's game as there is in the men's game, so more research is needed. A lot of the research that's been done, it's still in that preliminary stage where they're still trying to understand, what the results are of those studies. So, like I said, we ran 4 studies last year in the FPC, which is a huge number for that level of competition and the resourcing that you have at that level. So there was that modified head injury assessment process that I talked about before. We looked at what we called the REP study, which was looking at factors that you might pick up before someone returns to contact, if there was something being missed in that head injury assessment process that we were finding later on that we might then include in the HIA process. We looked at a saliva study and whether that could help detect concussion. And then we also used the smart mouth guards in FPC. So that also contributed to the research that World Rugby has used to inform these the smart mouth guard mandate that they've put in place from the 1st of January this year.
Is it the sort of things we're looking out for, potentially things like the types of contacts that we take, create more incidents of concussion? Is it trying to get enough data to be able to break down whether it's going into a ruck, whether it's a tackle, whether it's a high tackle, whether it's a low tackle? Is it that sort of thing that we hope to get more and more information on, so that we can then advise our players around, if you tackle this way, you have the least likely chance of getting concussion. If you enter a ruck this way, is it that sort of stuff that we're trying to dig into, and like we say, get bigger data sets on that?
Yeah, that's right. So we know that concussions are not good. So we want to understand basically the impacts. We want to reduce them, and then we want to manage players' brain health basically now and through their careers in rugby. So the information that we're getting from this will help to do all of those things that you're talking about, understand, where the highest head accelerations are happening in the game, what position are players in, what position do they play, is it worse for forwards or backs, is it different for men versus women, and then you can, as you say, target your interventions, your law changes, all of those things to whatever it is that you find.
There's a lot goes on, isn't there? There is a lot goes on. Look, you touched on a little bit around the smart mouthguard technology, and that's something that's a little bit of coverage lately, and it's something that we're bringing into the professional game more and more. It's in Super Rugby at the moment. How does something like that get started? Like, how do we decide to take on these initiatives? Why do we take on these initiatives? Can you sort of explain to us a little bit that process, and then also whether it be some of the findings we've had already, or what we hope to get from a pretty significant project that we've taken on there?
Yeah, well, I'll probably hand to Janelle, but really, the research started about 3 years ago, and Janelle was a key part of one of the projects that started in the community down in Dunedin with Otago Rugby, so I'll let you take that one.
Yeah, so I guess that project was kind of the brainchild of World Rugby, NFLV, and Ross Tucker, and really the aim was to
Who's Ross Tucker?
He's one of the
another big brain.
Yeah, another big brain that works with World Rugby.
Nice.
And really the aim of that project was to understand what do head acceleration events look like at the community level from under 13 up to our senior adults. So yeah, as Karen mentioned, that was a really big project that was kind of run across the 2021 season, and then spilled over into 2022. We had 700 athletes at the community level, equal numbers of male and female, and then we had about 4 teams at the U13 level. We had 8, kind of 4 male, 4 female at the U15, U18, and then senior. And the aim of that was to exactly understand where these head acceleration events are happening, and what position the players are in. So I guess to just explain the extent of that study, for every single game, there was 3. This is at the community level. Remember this. So we've got 3 camera angles set up for every game. All the players were instrumented with the smart mouth guards, and then for every single impact that happened, we were able to link up the instant of the mouth guard with the time on the video footage to understand what that player was doing. So we've got a massive data set that we're able to understand what's happening in the community game. So.
Is it as simple as, or not as simple as, but are some of the findings in, the faster someone's moving, the more likely it is, or is it more to do with body position, or is it... Or that's the stuff we're trying to figure out. We're trying to get more information on that. Because there's a few guys in rugby, when I was playing, I'd like to slow down. So if we put some rules around that, but is it that sort of stuff that we're trying to dig into?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first aim was to understand what does an overall week exposure look like? How do trainings compare to games?
Yeah.
So that was kind of the first output, and how does that exposure change as you go from under 13, as you go up in the grades? So that research was actually published back in October of last year. And generally, as they increased in age, we did see a larger exposure for our male players happening in their games compared to their trainings. At our younger grades, when a lot more time is spent on development, it was a bit more equal in terms of total total exposure, total number of impacts that happen between trainings and games. Our female data is currently being underway right now, and it should be out in the next couple months. And the next stage of that is really underpinning all the match events. initial findings suggest that majority of the events are happening in the tackle to the tackler and ball carrier. There's very little that happen in the scrum. Almost none are happening in the scrum, which is good. But yeah, majority of the events are happening in the tackle. And
so not even in the contact area, breakdown, ruck time. Like it's probably the majority are still in that tackle area.
Yeah, the ruck is number 2 after the tackle and ball carry.
Is it significantly different? Like is it 80% in the tackle, 70% in the tackle, and only 20 in the breakdown, or are we sort of still digging into the detail a bit more around what that looks like?
Yeah, I think I don't have the numbers off the top of my head right now, but those results will be coming soon.
Absolutely. So it's mandated by World Rugby across all our elite competitions. I suppose that's probably a good thing, isn't it, for the women's game, because it, like you say, it's emerging, it's growing so quickly that we need the data fast, don't we? We're going to have all these, or we are having all these girls and females entering the game. We need to get up to speed on giving them the best information as fast as we possibly can. So it has to be a real advantage for that to be mandated and to be supported by World Rugby. Would that be right?
Yeah, definitely. I think there was a lot of angst about the mandate and just how quickly it was brought in. But I think that World Rugby have done the right thing in terms of they're doing something, and as we're going along, we're ironing out some of those teething issues that you're talking about. But it does mean that it benefits the women's game. Like I said, we used it in FPC last year. We want to do it again this year for FPC because we need more women's data. But because of the mandate, it means that obviously the compliance levels are a lot higher, and the amount of data that World Rugby is collecting now each game is phenomenal. So it's going to it's going to give us information on so many different aspects of the game. Rugby is the only sport that's doing it at the moment. So the NFL's not using this, AFL not yet. So it's a very bold and brave move, but I think it's been good. Ultimately, it's going to have a really great outcome for our players.
And I suppose that's their role to play, isn't it? By you're able to compare notes, aggregate data, etc., with other countries, which surely accelerates our outcomes, gets our guidelines to market quicker. Like that's a real advantage of having a governing body who comes in and mandates us to do these things.
Yeah, that's right. And I guess the great thing is that you're getting data from all over the world. So it's not just here in New Zealand, it's in the UK and South Africa and the USA. So Major League Rugby are also using the smart mouth guards. And for us, by being part of it, it means that we are contributing to the data from a New Zealand perspective, our style of play. We've got different population, Māori and Pacifica. We're probably, alongside the UK, one of the few competitions in the world that have a professional women's competition. I think it's been a good move, but it's been obviously not without its issues.
I mean, let's talk a little bit like any initiative, any technology. I'm sure there's always a few teething problems before we absolutely nail it. From a medical perspective, Karen, what's an experience you've dealt with like that before, like to sort of show that we probably do get to the right place in the end?
Yeah, well, I mean, just those 4 studies that we put into FPC last year, it was a very ambitious project to do at that level. I mean, we probably wouldn't even be able to achieve that at Super Rugby level.
Yeah.
So, it went on the smell of an oily rag, basically. But the data that we got out of that, I think, was just invaluable, and it's informed, the mandate around the mouth guards now. It's going to help us with the saliva testing is really exciting, because if the results from that are positive, then that's going to help us at all levels of the game. So, yeah, I guess, it was a bit of a struggle putting all those things in place, but the impact of that, is huge.
It's such a topical thing, but I think by chatting to you guys, you see just how much work is going on in the background to try and get this right, and how much we genuinely care about the rugby playing community. Like you touched on this a little bit earlier, at a Whareparma Cup level, and again in collaboration with World Rugby, was the marker diagnostics, the saliva testing, which you just touched on a little bit, but Like, what's that all about? What's the goal of that project, and how is that complementary to some of the other things that we've just been discussing for the last 5 or 10 minutes?
Yeah, so the saliva testing was looking at what we call micro RNAs, or not small non-coding RNAs in saliva. So they're biomarkers. So RNAs are molecules that carry genetic material that are basically essential to the biological processes in the body. So that's kind of what it means in kind of basic terms. But there are certain biomarkers that they've found in the men's game in the UK that help with the diagnosis of concussion, and so they were wanting to look at whether that was the same in women. So the study that we did in the FPC last year was a collaboration between New Zealand Rugby at Otago University, University of Birmingham in the UK, and World Rugby alongside Marker Diagnostics. This is their technology. And so what that entailed was taking a baseline sample of players' saliva pre-season, and then if they had a suspected concussion during the season, then we took additional samples at the HIA, different HIA time points. And so that data is being analysed at the moment.
Wow.
So.
Well, it's unreal, really, how much research is going on behind the scenes on some of the really topical player safety issues, particularly in the women's game. Like, there's so much data, do you feel it is better informing us? It's helping us make good decisions around some of the guidelines that we're putting in place for our players. Like, is that stuff happening?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, we're seeing it with the smart mouth guards. We had 3 years of research and collecting data in the community game, and also that extended out to the professional game as well. We actually trialled the smart mouth guards in Super Rugby last year. Right. And so you're seeing like that in practice now, is that it's now, I guess, part like business as usual for competitions at that Super Rugby level and above across the world. So that research is then, very quickly being used.
Implementation.
Yeah, it's being implemented pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And it has to be, because this is such an important area, and we do genuinely care about our people who play rugby, and we want to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to protect their brains.
That's awesome. And like, is the goal, whether it's a stretch goal, long-term, short-term, whatever, will there come a time when potentially for my under-12 team, or for a secondary school team or a club team, we can purchase a smart mouth guard, and there's something that will go to a mobile phone app, and that will help community volunteers, people who just love the game and putting their time in, sort of better inform those diagnoses as well, because you give it your best shot, but obviously you're not a medical professional, so you go through the guidelines that are given to you, which are really good, but this perhaps is another tool somewhere in the future that might be available to not just professional environments, but maybe wider. Is that maybe a place we might get to in some stage?
Yeah, absolutely. At the moment, these mouth guards, they're pretty expensive, but like all sorts of technology, once you scale it up, then and with time, with improvements, they become more affordable.
Go across multiple sports and create a bigger market. Yeah, totally.
That's right. There's already work that Janelle has been doing in the community around concussion and concussion notification to doctors and all of those sorts of things that, it's easy to do certain things at the professional level because you've got all the resource, but at the community, really where you want to have an impact is at the community level, where you can scale, or people can afford to use a phone or whatever it is to help them make decisions.
Yeah, and I totally agree, and I think some of the ethos of the companies that are developing it is that they really do want to be able to support at the community level. So I think once they've really nailed the technology and they're there, it's just being able to bring that price point down, so that it'd be accessible for all players.
I'm sure it will happen. Gosh, I remember a day when we used to, write the scores down on a bit of paper and someone would run it off, and about 1,000 years later it would be recorded somewhere, and now we just, we put the score straight into our mobile app. I can watch all the games in my grade at a community level. I can live score them. I can see it all in real time. And now that's adopted across not just rugby, but a whole lot of other sports. And I hope that sort of the player safety aspects follow a similar trend, and these things, if they're proven, become accessible to all, which sounds like we're we're all working towards. Look, thank you so much for coming in today. It sort of blows my mind a little bit, like a number of things. One, how much is going on in the space and player safety? Like it's all go, isn't it? So you guys are doing great work, but also just the growth of the women's game is unreal, isn't it? Like I think the call to action is we need more people involved. Like the more the merrier, because there's just a lot to do. But it's a really exciting time, and thank you guys for coming in and chatting a little bit about it.
Thanks, Rob.
Awesome.